Welcome, and thank you for joining us as we celebrate the strength and transformative impact of Black philanthropy in our community. I am Shawn Brown, and I have the privilege of serving as board chair of the Texas Women's Foundation. Our organization has a deep commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. From our very diverse founders, 19 women representing every ethnicity, culture, race, and political affiliation, to our board that is 48% women of color and LGBTQ, and our staff that is 54% women of color. Given who we are, there is no better organization than Texas Women's Foundation to host this important celebration of Black philanthropy. August is Black Philanthropy Month, and I would like to give credit to Dr. Jacqueline Bouvier Copeland and the Pan-African Women's Philanthropy Network for establishing this important landmark in the philanthropic space 9 years ago. Today is a celebration because in spite of the tides of challenges that we face as a Black community, our impact as philanthropists runs wide on a global scale. We are proud to be a part of the waves of change in North Texas and beyond, and we are honored to have this opportunity to celebrate and elevate our Black culture of giving. Thank you for listening in to learn how we seek to influence the philanthropic community through our leadership and strategic investments in the communities in which we all live. Today, we'll hear from great leaders in Black philanthropy. One of these is our moderator, Hattie Hill, who is CEO of TD Jakes Foundation. She is a senior executive and transformational leader with more than 30 years of experience in diversity and inclusion strategy, board governance, profit and loss management, and risk mitigation for multinational companies in a variety of industries. Most recently, Hattie was president and CEO of Women's Food Service Forum, and we have the great privilege of her serving on the board of directors of the Texas Women's Foundation. Our panelists are also accomplished Black women in philanthropy, and I will have Hattie to share more about what's in store for each of us as we celebrate this important part of our heritage as Black women. Hattie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Shawn, and good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Today is a celebration of our strength as Black women philanthropists and the possibilities that are at the fingertips when we invest in our communities and in our families. The potential is even greater when we mobilize our philanthropy in ways that support Black leadership in the nonprofit sector at board and executive levels. To set the stage for our discussion, I'd like to offer a quick perspective on Black philanthropy. Philanthropy has been, in my opinion, and continues to be the foundation of the Black community. Strategic giving has always been at the core, whether it was through our church tithes, community foundations that we support, or projects. What does the data really say about Blacks in philanthropy? According to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, 75% of charitable gifts in the US come from individual benefactors. African Americans are at the top of that range, with 25% of their discretionary income in Black households going to their favorite causes. It is estimated that that is over $1,600 on average. We all have our own personal stories with Black philanthropy. I will tell you personally, my engagement, I've always been a part of giving back. But I had an experience that I'll share with you as we get ready to introduce our panel. Many years ago, I was sitting at a dinner table at a banquet with one of the well-known Black philanthropists, Miss Osceola McCarthy. Miss McCarthy had spent many years as a washwoman in Mississippi. And when she gave away $150,000, which by the way was only part of her the money she had saved, but she gave it to minority students to help with their college at Southern Mississippi University. And so she had a notoriety, and I had the chance to talk with her at dinner. And first of all, it was a big aha to me because she said, examine yourself. And I think we're really asking each one of us to do that today. Examine ourselves as philanthropists, as Black philanthropists. And she inspired me to do more. So we have an amazing group of panelists that we hope today that will inspire you to do more. In this moment in the history of the United States, when there is a broad movement to address systemic racism, we have a clear call to action. And I'm so excited to have this discussion with our amazing panelists to shed light on the extraordinary opportunities to transform philanthropy in ways that best benefit Black communities. If you have questions, we hope to be able to take those toward the end. Please put those questions in the Q&A box, and our panelists will hopefully have an opportunity to answer as many of those as we possibly can. So please meet our panelists. First, we have Halima Leak Francis. Halima is a founding chair of Heritage Giving Fund at Texas Women's Foundation. Heritage encourages philanthropy in the African American and Black community to contribute in a strategic and meaningful way and to bring a new source of funding to nonprofit organizations serving African American women and girls throughout the North Texas area. Halima is the Public Administration Program Director and a Professor of Practice at Tulane University School of Professional Advancement, with more than 20 years of expertise in nonprofit leadership, philanthropy, capacity building, sustainability, organizational change, and higher education. Halima is a pioneer in her own right in that she launched Tulane's first Master of Public Administration. Halima, welcome. Our next panelist is Catherine Kelly. Catherine McKellen Kelly is currently the Economic Educational Specialist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas in the Outreach and Communications Department. She is a board member of We Are Her Leadership Academy and a member of the Business Council for the Arts Leadership Arts Alumni Committee. Catherine is also a founding member of the Heritage Giving Fund and Power and Action, as well as is a Moving Worlds Institute Global Fellow and a Movement Fellow. Lisa Montgomery is our next panelist. Lisa is a founder of the Village Giving Circle at Texas Women's Foundation. The Village's mission is to honor, sustain, and expand the legacy of African American women philanthropy by funding organizations and initiatives that positively impact the African American community in North Texas. Lisa is the owner and creative director of Lux Events, a full-service special events company based in Frisco, Texas. She's also a board director with Texas Women's Foundation, serving on the executive committee as a board member for the AT&T Performing Arts Center. Welcome, Lisa. And our last panelist, Denise Evans Page. Denise is a founding member of the Village Giving Circle at Texas Women's Foundation. Denise is Vice President, Fossil Global Philanthropy and Sustainability, and head of Fossil Foundation. She's an active civic leader, serving on the boards for Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, AT&T Performing Arts Center, Jesuits Foundation Board of Trustees, IDEO.org, and Southern New Hampshire University. This is our panel, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome them. We're excited to have you here, panelists, and we're going to jump right in. And again, as a reminder to our audience, if you have questions, and we want to welcome your questions, please put those in the Q&A box on your screen. So Halima, let's start with you. What motivated you to start a giving circle? And can you share insights on the impact that has been made for Black women because of Heritage Giving Fund?
Thank you so much for having me and allowing me to be a part of this conversation. First, I want to acknowledge and recognize the vision of Akila Wallace, who was really truly the visionary behind Heritage Giving Circle. Akila came to us and came to myself to share her idea of creating a space for Black women to give, to make an impact in the North Texas region. And Heritage Giving Circle emerged out of that vision and really her brilliance and her just work in this space. So I first want to acknowledge that and thank Akila for her vision. In terms of what inspired and really what resonated with me about the Giving Circle, the Heritage Giving Circle vision, was the notion of narrative. So key, critical and central to our work is the narrative of Black philanthropy, the narrative of Black women leading in the nonprofit sector, honoring those of us who are uplifting our community. So the power of those narratives that are often not recognized is really central to the work of Heritage. Recognizing individuals such as Pearl Anderson and those who are watching may be familiar with her story, but certainly you can go do research. And I encourage people to do research to learn about her because there's so much there. She's a mother of philanthropy in the North Texas region. So recognizing that we are present in that space, we have been present in that space, and also recognizing the work of the nonprofit organizations led by Black women. Also, resources. So bringing resources to organizations who are on the ground doing this work. Oftentimes, our organizations that serve Black women and girls are underfunded, under-resourced. Oftentimes, our leaders who are leading those organizations who are Black women are disproportionately underfunded. So really lifting up those organizations and advocating for them and providing resources such as technical support, mentoring, emotional, mental support to really help them continue to do that work. And then creating a space of community. So really with our Giving Circle, we welcome women to, Black women to contribute. And we also welcome women who may not be able to give at the multi-million-dollar level. So our community of donors, our community of supporters really addresses this notion that philanthropy is exclusively for wealthy people. So we are building this pipeline of philanthropists. We're building a community of philanthropists that makes space for everyone at the table. And that is central to our work. So really those three things, as I think about the spirit and the work of Heritage, those are really core to our approach and to what we do. And they really inspire us and motivate us as a collective.
Thank you so much, Nimra. Let's go on, Lisa, and we'll start with you next. Let's talk about the grant making process. How has the grant making process transformed philanthropy for you and other members of the village? And how does the Giving Circle enrich your philanthropy through opportunities to engage with other donors?
Sorry.
There
There we go. Thank you so much, Hattie, for facilitating this very important discussion today. And thank you to Texas Women's Foundation for all of the support that they provide to the Giving Circles. Let me start by saying I'm so proud of the work that both Heritage and the Village are doing in the community, and really excited to be part of today's discussion. So back to your question, Hattie, for me, and I think for many members of the Village, the grant making process has taken some of the mystery out of philanthropy because it brings everything full circle. Our members get to see the impact of their gifts every year at our granting ceremony in November. They get to see that the dollars they gave, on the other end of those dollars, are women, men, and children whose lives are changed for the better. And as we head into our third year of grant making, I think we realize that our collective giving as Black women has a voice and a power to it. And what I mean by that is being in a unique position as funders, allows us to have influence not only on what causes we fund, but also which organizations we fund and entrust our dollars to. And so for me, and I think many members of the village, it's the grant making process has made philanthropy more personal to us.
Great, thank you, Lisa. All right, Catherine, we'll go to you next. In what ways is Heritage Giving Fund meeting an unmet need in the Black community as it relates to impact and leadership?
Patty, thank you so much for having me today and asking this very crucial question. I did want to set the stage a little bit with some numbers on what the current state of philanthropy is going to organizations that are run and for women and girls of color. So the Miss Foundation for Women released a landmark study earlier this year, actually in July, that truly speaks to what the funding patterns are for organizations who are for and by women of color. The Miss Foundation found that on average, the women and girls of color just receive about $5.48 per year per each woman or girl in the United States in philanthropic funding. And that accounts for about 0.5% of the total $66.9 billion that is given every year by foundations. This report also highlighted some important things like organizations that serve subpopulations like Black and African American women and girls were more likely to work with budgets that are under $50,000 a year. Participating organizations said that they had applied for foundational funding, but found barriers to finding funding that truly was relevant to their organization. The median size grant by foundations to organizations by women and girls of color is $15,000, which is less than half the median grant size for all grants by foundations, which is reported to be around $35,000 a year. And nearly 9 out of 10 organizations by women and girls of color focus on 3 or more issues because of the intersectional reality that this demographic really focuses on. In another study released in 2019 by grant makers for girls of color, they found that a lot of the time, philanthropic organizations tend to define and support girls of color in a way that girls of color don't identify themselves and aren't the needs that they're saying that they have. Girls' issues are typically seen as private issues. So a lot of times people assume that girls and women of color organizations are really battling organizations that are that typically are dominated by boys and men of color work for funding. But actually those issues are fighting for visibility at all, because a lot of the issues that are intersectional that affect women are typically kind of seen as closed door issues. So you keep them in the house, you don't talk about them. So that becomes an issue of visibility around the issues altogether. There's also an issue of underdeveloped intersectional equity lenses that are used by philanthropic foundations, so that nonprofit leaders who are working directly with these girls and women of color typically have a hard time finding funding that directly relates to their individual needs. So really with that information, it makes it hard for organizations to find adequate funding that really is going to encompass all their needs and not piecemeal it all together. So this leads to a very time-consuming process by the organizational leaders that tends to really eat away at the organization's already limited resources. So if an organization is under $50,000 in budget and having to spend 3 weeks on their 2-person staff to write a grant application that might actually not fit their needs, we have a larger problem here. So that's why I'm so excited to be a member of the Heritage Giving Fund, because truly the way that we have gone about our grant making is truly impactful. So we focus specifically on this group that we know is generally not seen in a lot of our larger foundation grant making. Heritage Giving Fund grants to North Texas organizations served by Black women and girls who live, work, or study in North Texas that are Black female-led and serve at least 50% of their clients are Black. More importantly, we do not just give funding, we also create long-lasting relationships with our grantees and really work on having continued education and capacity building programming for those organizations and their leaderships. Because we understand that when you're working with organization that's a two-man staff, everyone's putting in their own dollars to sometimes even just keep the lights on for their organization, there's not always time to spend money on professional development. How do you write a better grant? How do you get social media to become better, or different things like that? So we really focus on building that capacity for the organizations that we grant to. So it's not just a one and done, here's your check, but it's a lifelong conversation about how can we better serve your needs and help you get to that next level. And really, I find that the use of giving our time and talent to these organizations is the most impactful part of the Heritage Giving Fund, because many of the Heritage Giving Fund members are nonprofit organization workers themselves. So they have that skill set that is nuanced in that nonprofit world and understand how a lot of these systems work and are willing to provide that information that they've learned to the other organizations that we work with. And this has definitely affected how I grant. It really makes me think about who I'm granting to, and thanks to Halima, Akila, and Francois for their leadership, because I'm really getting the opportunity to meet these grassroots organizations that have been built for the people, by the people. So it's really made me think about where my dollars are going, and then really focusing on first and foremost organizations that prioritize that they look and feel like the people that they serve, and making sure my dollars go there first, and then to other organizations I might want to benefit, and always looking for other ways outside of the dollar donation that I can donate my time or talent to better an organization.
Awesome, Catherine. Thank you. And thanks for the data. I should have been taking notes. Thanks for that. All right, Denise. And for all the panelists, we have a question that I'll come back to you after Denise, that really talks about being invited to submit. You know, how do you make sure you get your application in? So we want to answer that. But before we go to that question from the audience, Denise, how does the Village Giving Circle mission align with your values? Tell us about the Mission Giving Circle.
Sure. Let me first give all of you a virtual hug. I so wish that we could be together. And so I want to start with that. When I think about my values aligning with those of the Village Giving Circle, it really does start with love. And so when you think about what we're doing collectively, for me, it really does start with love. I think the other things that are so powerful in terms of the circle and what we're creating is the collaboration model itself. I think all of you have talked about this opportunity to pull together like-minded, philanthropic women of color, and specifically Black women. But the collaboration piece of this really is part of who I am, knowing that there is really a bigger opportunity to make collective impact when we actually come together. And I think the third part of this, you know, as I think about what we've created, is really about innovation. I'm one who really looks at system change, not just putting Band-Aids on problems. And so when I think about what the Giving Circle, the discussions we have, the really rich conversations we have, we really do think about the deep-rooted cause of the problems we're trying to serve, right? How do we really come together? It's more than just the money. We also lend our time, and we also, most importantly, lend our expertise. So I really think about this innovative model that we're actually creating together as Black women.
Awesome. And so a question for all of you from our audience is really about the application process. Does the organization have to be invited to submit an application? And Halima, I'll start with you. How do they get connected to you?
So our process, and I'll say that our processes are probably different from Giving Circle to Giving Circle. They are all unique. Our process begins with it's a bit of an interest meeting or a technical support meeting where we invite prospective grantees to come learn about the grant process. We walk through the application with them. We give them coaching and insight on not only preparing an application for our grants, but also just general best practices in applying for grant funding. And that's a central part to our process. So we do have a bit of it's an orientation, open house type of process that starts there. And from there, grantees can apply through the portal, the Texas Women's Foundation portal, have to be considered for grants. It's not an invitation only process, but following invitations we assess, or following applications we assess the applications, and then we do site visits or interviews with grantees to really connect with them and understand what they are experiencing as nonprofit organizations, because that's critical to this process, is really understanding what are nonprofit professionals experiencing in the work that they do. Oftentimes in those conversations, we hear the real challenges and struggles, and we encourage organizations to be transparent about that, because again, following Lisa's comment about the mystique and the mystery around grant making and receiving within the nonprofit sector, a lot of times organizations feel that they have to put their face on, so they wear a bit of a mask when they're applying. So we really want to know what their experiences are, so that we can have an authentic and relevant relationship with our grantees. And then we get back together as a body, and we have discussions around our site visits, around the applications, and then we make funding decisions. So it's a really involved process where we really seek to get to know the organizations who will be funding.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts on application, Catherine or Lisa? Or Denise, Lisa.
Sorry, I'm muted.
Okay.
I would add that for the village, our process is by invitation. And we do that for a couple of reasons. It's one of the benefits of being a member of the village is that our members are very active in our community, and they have personal relationships many times with organizations and know the work already that they do. And so each village member is invited every year to submit to organizations to apply for grants. And then our process is very similar to what Halima described. They submit an application through the portal at Texas Women's Foundation. All of our members have an opportunity to be involved in the site visit and evaluation process. And again, similar to what Halima said, those site visits are so critical to how we make our decisions, and they really give us an opportunity to say to organizations, we love the work that you're doing in the community. And by the way, it's important to us that your board of directors and your leadership team looks like the community that you serve. So that has been very important for the village, and yeah, that's how we do grants.
Great. And Lisa, that's a good point. And Janice, I'll let you add on to this as well, especially with the conversation on the village. One of the questions that we have from our audience is, how do organizations, back to Lisa's point, that are historically not very diverse, attract more diverse candidates to our board of directors? We want to be intentional about it, but also we want new candidates to know we want them there, not just because they are diverse.
Right.
So Denise, you want to take it?
Gee, thank you, Hattie.
I know, right?
Involved in lots of conversations of this sort right now, both within the for-profit space, but also the nonprofit space. And I do know this topic is top of mind for every board I'm on, with the exception, obviously, of the Village Giving Circle. All the other boards I'm on are not very diverse, with the exception also of AT&T Performing Arts Center. And so if I use that as an example, I will say the leadership of that organization has been extremely intentional to ensure that the board represents the community that we serve. And so that started with Matrice Ellis-Kirk's leadership. She was very intentional. And so when I think about how do we get more people of color, I think it's one of those things where you have to be intentional about it. It doesn't just happen, right? And there are a plethora of resources to support you on that journey in terms of becoming more diverse. And so I think it's one of those things where when we really want to do something, we double down with strategies and tactics and metrics. And we'll call that out from an accountability perspective, is that every board should have that same rigor in place if they really want to be intentional about being diverse.
Great. Thank you for that.
I'd
Catherine?
actually like to add on to that. So one thing that studies have found is that it's not that there aren't diverse individuals who would be interested in participating in your board, it's just that they're not asked. So typically, if you can find those organizations, like we have a very great Black MBA association here in Dallas, and getting in front of that group and explaining what the purpose of the organization is, why you're there with them, and what you're hoping to gain with their expertise coming into the conversation by joining your board. So being intentional by bringing yourself to those organizations instead of waiting for them to come to you, and also looking at your current board and making sure that it's inclusive, because diversity is one thing, but if they get there and feel as though they don't have a voice and they feel as though they can't speak up to make change, then they're not going to stay. And I'm actually going to tag on, someone had asked the question about how do you show that your staff is diverse and leadership is diverse.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about, and for me personally, when I look at an organization's webpage, if your board of directors and your senior leadership does not have any color in it, I have questions. Because it's not because there aren't individuals in the nonprofit world that are capable of these positions. It's what stereotypes, what assumptions are you making when hiring? What language are you using when hiring that might keep people from applying for those jobs? And I really think that it's an once again, intentionality behind who's sitting in those positions and why you are doing so. If it's just to have a diverse picture, that's great, but people are going to be able to smell that eventually. If you really want to bring in different perspectives and really grow how your understanding of the community is and different things like that, then you really have to do some work.
Great, Catherine. That's a great point. And all of that starts with building relationships, right? So Halima, I'll come to you with this question from our audience. It's a young woman who said she'd like to work in philanthropy / corporate social responsibility. Where would you suggest that she starts in terms of job titles to start getting her into that role?
And I'm really glad that she asked that question for multiple reasons. One being, of course, the MPA at Tulane. So education is a great pathway for that. And I say that not only from a skill set development standpoint, but also a networking standpoint. So when you look at the job market in philanthropy, and even also in the nonprofit sector as well, it's highly networked. So it's people who have worked together as volunteers, people who've sat on committees together. If you look at the composition of a lot of our organizations, we've gotten to know one another just simply because we sit on committees together. And we've had a chance to kind of test drive the work of individuals. So when an opportunity opens, you come to mind as a great person who's a great fit for those opportunities. So, and also as I look at kind of my own career path, being present in those volunteer spaces, I can't underestimate or underemphasize the importance of that. So that's one thing. Also, in terms of job positions to look for. So in philanthropy, program officer positions, if you have a specific area of expertise, looking into a program officer position in education, in health and equity, economic development. So typically nonprofits or typically foundations have buckets or have areas that they focus on as philanthropic priorities. And if you have expertise in that specific area, then you can bring that expertise to the table. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the skill set of grant making in your toolkit, but you understand the needs of the industry, you understand the needs of the community, you understand the needs of the field, so that you can make prudent and responsible decisions about how funding is allocated. There's also a huge need for people who work in evaluation and assessment. So throughout the philanthropic community, people who can look at programs and assess them and evaluate their effectiveness through a multidimensional lens, because typically we assess or philanthropic organizations assess outcomes, or they assess productivity it can be in a pretty linear way, but we all know that working in nonprofits is anything but linear. So being able to bring in all of those complexities, being able to bring in all of the nuances, being able to understand those things as you are making funding decisions is critical in bringing that to the table. And as you are building your capacity as a professional in this space, I think being able to understand all of the nuances of contemporary grant making, quite frankly, is really critical in positioning yourself for those opportunities when they do arise. I also encourage people, if there's a foundation whose work that you particularly appreciate, reach out to their program officers and talk to them and get a sense of the work that they do. I can honestly say that every program officer I've reached out to just for a coffee meeting, the majority of them have gotten back to me and said, okay, sure, let's meet. It might take a while because we are all very busy in this space, but they do get back to you, and they're generally good people. So if you are engaged in the community, if you are building your network, and if you are making sure that you come to the table with the expertise needed, you do set yourself up for success in this space.
Great, thank you, Halima. A question, and Denise, I'll go to you first on this one, and it really is about what the larger funders miss. And someone asked this question, based on what you learned from your grantees, what are larger funders missing by not investing in the work of organizations like the Village and the organizations you support? And I'll tell you why this is such an important question. When we put this out on social media, I talked to someone yesterday, and large funder, great person, big giver. And she said, oh, Hattie, I saw you were doing this on social media. I didn't even realize these type of organizations exist. And so, and this is someone that I know is a huge giver and has giving as a part of her heart. So how do we work toward making sure people know about the work and the value of the work?
Well, I often speak to the fact that giving in and of itself is a business, right? And so when we think about philanthropy and organizations that do it really well, they too, just like for-profit businesses, spend a lot of time on marketing, especially now social media strategies, et cetera. So I do believe that we're going to start seeing some shifts in terms of companies even wanting to invest in programs and organizations such as all of the Village Giving Circle and all of the giving circles. But I think we also have to treat it like a business from a marketing perspective. And right now, as you just heard from someone, social media is at the top of the list, right? So I think we can be more intentional about what is that real strategy. And I also don't think it's a spray and pray model. I think you have to be extremely focused and make sure you reach the audience that is desired from a funding perspective. So I do think the opportunity is there, but that's not where the focus has been for many of us, at least at a giving circle level.
Other thoughts on that, Lisa, Catherine? Just letting people know that it exists.
I will comment too. I think it's also important to speak to impact, because as people think about where they want to invest, and I'm very involved in a lot of the impact investing spaces, I think we also have to be very intentional and not just talking about the mission and we're doing good stuff, but really demonstrate the rigor that's in place as well as real strong evidence of impact.
Great, awesome.
And I'd like to add to that too, just from the funder perspective. I've seen models where collaboration works really well. So where funders join together and they build a pool of funds where they are kind of distributing to organizations that are addressing a specific cause. And we saw a lot of this in COVID-19 and approaches that philanthropic organizations took. They would get together and talk about organizations doing the work. So I like to encourage funders to talk to one another about organizations that they know of who are doing the work. And inevitably, someone who has not been recognized, someone who's kind of flown under the radar, bubbles up as an organization. It's like, wait a minute, they are doing tremendous work, but they don't have the capacity to promote their work. They don't have the capacity to invest in marketing. They're boots on the ground working so hard that they don't have the bandwidth to do these things. And honestly, those organizations come to a head, or they are recognized when we talk to one another, because oftentimes we may be sitting on their boards, we may be volunteering for them, we may have done a drive-through donation to them and said, hey, they're doing some tremendous work. So I would encourage philanthropic organizations to talk to one another, and then also seek out those organizations that may have a smaller operating budget, quite frankly, because that's usually where a lot of good work is being done, but they just don't have the bandwidth to promote it and advertise it like that.
I was going to add one thing. Thank you, Halima. I was also going to suggest this is a time for us to get into good trouble. And I say that because we would never will a pandemic to happen, right? Where we're seeing, on top of that, of course, racial discourse. So when you think about what's happening, right, and how our community in particular has been impacted by the pandemic, and then of course what has happened after that in terms of racial injustice, this is our time.
It is.
So I'm going to say it to all of us as Black philanthropists, this is our time. And I say that because I know quite a few people have come to me, even on the corporate funding side, saying, who should we invest in? Who's doing really good social justice work? So I would say to all of us is, if you don't have that marketing plan in place or that fund development strategy, again, this is our time.
Great. Lisa?
Patty, yes, I had one other thing I wanted to add is that there are some real hidden gems in our in the nonprofit world, and that aren't always visible to the larger funders. And organizations like the Village Giving Circle and Heritage are here to elevate the visibility of those organizations. They're doing incredible work, and sometimes on a shoestring budget or no budget at all. But those real hidden gems, I think that's a missed opportunity for larger funders that they may not be in their eyes view.
That's a great comment, Lisa, because you think about the reason, Janice, to your point, that we've had so many people reaching out, in the social justice movement, is because they didn't have those relationships before. And so now it's all hands on deck to try to build those relationships. A question from our audience, just back to how much can you give? Halima, you said you really take money at any level, for both of the Heritage and the Village. Is there a minimum amount that you can start with?
So members for Heritage Giving starts at $500 for membership. For a voting member, it's $1,000. We do accept donations at any level, and they would come from people who are friends of Heritage. So we do also have a community of friends who give below those levels as well.
Lisa?
And for the Village, Hattie, we accept gifts at all level, but voting membership is $2,500. And we started with 9 members, and to date we were at 72 amazing committed women, which has allowed us to raise nearly $500,000 in just 3 years. And so we are extraordinarily proud of that, but we welcome gifts at all levels.
Awesome, great. All right, so let's go with this question, because I think as we start to wind down toward our time, and one of the questions that we started with is examining ourselves and thinking about how we can make a difference here. So we know how important philanthropy is. We know how important it is for us as Black philanthropists. And so how can we activate this amazing audience? And for those that we did not get to all of your questions, we just appreciate you asking, and we know there's more to come. But how can we activate this audience in this moment for this audience to be more engaged, more involved, more excited? Or in my personal situation, how can each one of this audience have their Osceola McCarthy moment? So Catherine, I'll start with you, and I want each one of you to respond to that.
For me, thinking about it from the young professional perspective, I'm 27, so my funds are not great, but they can make an impact. But what I really hope that you can take away is that it's not just the dollar donation that can make the difference. It's also donating your time and donating your talent to help organizations that need it the most. A lot of the times when you think of philanthropy, you think of large donations, but that doesn't always have to be the case. And I hope soon we get to this point where talent is valued just as much as dollar amounts given, because a lot of the times those talents are talents that organizations wish they had, or resources they wish they had, to be able to make a difference, to build capacity, to make the change. And definitely on those on the ground groups, it's so important for them to have those additional talent resources.
Awesome. So time, talent, and treasure. And it's, Catherine, it's great that you said that, because even the major corporations, as I've been working with the TD Jakes Foundation and working with the big corporate, everybody starts with, we want to give you our treasure, but we also want our time and talent. So awesome for that. All right, Miss Lisa, we'll come to you next. How can we activate? How can we get people to examine themselves and do more?
Hattie, I think what Janice said is so true. It is our time. And I say all the time, our community needs us. They need our voice. They need our talent, as Catherine said, and time. And they need to see us. They need to see us showing up in the community to help solve problems, to help address issues. And so I say, wherever your heart is, I'm sure that, you know, some of us are doing that work, the Village, Heritage, wherever your heart is, join us, become a friend of the Village, become a supporter of both Heritage and the Village. We'd love to have you, and we need you.
Awesome. All right, Janice, we'll go to you next.
I think by virtue of folks having dialed in for this particular conversation, is I'm hopeful they'll take a look at texaswomensfoundation.org. I will say start there. There are lots of incredible organizations. So I think it's one of those things of tapping into your passion in terms of what you care about, and leveraging that, because then it will become authentic to you. Yeah. But I still say that I think Texas Women's Foundation is one of the best organizations, not just in Dallas area, but in the state. So shameless plug, much love for this organization. The second thing I'm gonna ask is that everyone vote. So as important as our money is and our time, as important is please get out and vote this November and tell a friend.
All righty, Helena.
I certainly echo 1,000 times over everything that everybody has said. And I would add to this two things. The first is examine and explore and dig into the narrative. Every so often the narrative kind of lapses or it gets lost. So the conversation around Black philanthropy and its existence, and it kind of ebbs and flows if you're analyzing it historically. And there's a body of research that is very deep and very rich that informs us all. And I think that narrative is just as critical, and protecting it is just as critical as investing in it. So, you know, I pulled together a small research list or reading list for this, and I'm sure we can distribute it to participants, but really investing in exploring the narrative. The other thing that I would add is considering your career and how it aligns with this work. So if you work in a corporate setting, how is your business advancing equity? How, you know, corporate social responsibility, you know, how are you engaging and building up the community that you are benefiting from? If you work in government, what policies, what practices are you implementing that have an impact on the community. And certainly in the nonprofit sector, if that is a path that you would like to explore, we need talent, we need hands, we need workers, we need people to go out and do this work who are going to do it well and be committed to it. If you're interested in philanthropy, so I encourage people to examine their professions and how it aligns and how it intersects with this conversation. And then certainly examining your own giving. We all have something to give. If it's nothing but a song, sometimes we can just sing something encouraging to one another. Give what you can, and recognize that you do have friends and sisters in this work who are lifting you up. You're not standing in this alone. So that's what I would add in terms of examining ourselves, what we can do.
That's great. And I was going to comment, Catherine, on your point, because a lot of the younger women, I get that question all the time. Well, we haven't been working that long in our careers. We're still going. But what I'm hearing you all say is every dollar counts. And so no matter where you are, at what level, every dollar counts. The other thing that I will say, and you all have, as I look over the comments in the chat box and the questions, ladies, you have clearly tapped into a wonderful nerve with our women and our listeners. So thank you for that. Also, keeping in mind that there are additional resources that we will be providing. Let me thank you for giving us some resources that we can pass on through the chat for the organization. And thank each one of you for saying, examine yourself. I love that. I was looking at our notes and thinking, okay, what is the walk away? There's probably at every stage, Catherine, that I've probably examined in my 20s and then in my 30s and in your 40s, you start to examine. And now in my 60s, I'm really examining, because it's going to take all of us. I love your comment. Our community needs us. That's awesome, because right now it's all hands on deck. So we just appreciate the great feedback from you ladies today. We look forward to continuing the conversation because this has been phenomenal to hear from each one of you. And we will all continue based on this conversation to examine ourselves. I, Denise, am like you. I'm going to do a shameless plug for the Texas Women's Foundation, because I totally agree with you. The village, all of you, this is fantastic. Thank each one of you for participating. And then, of course, I have to thank our fearless CEO of the Texas Women's Foundation, Ms. Roslyn. Ros, thank you so much for doing this. This was great. We all applaud you. Because this was a phenomenal idea, and we just appreciate you leaning in on to help us do this. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Miss Roslyn Dawson Thompson. I'll give your official name for people who don't know you.
It's Roz. We know that. It's just Roz.
My friend, Roz, it's better. Thanks.
Oh, gosh. Hattie, thank you so much. And Halima, Catherine, Lisa, Janice, this has just been a magnificent conversation, celebration, and call to action. And we could not be more proud or honored to support this work that has been discussed today. So proud to be the fiscal agent for the Heritage Giving Fund, for the Village Giving Circle, and for two others, Orchid Giving Circle, which is for Asian American women, and also H100 for our Latina women. Each of the circles is a supremely meaningful collaboration of philanthropists doing very, very important work. But today, no more important moment or time than this, and this conversation, to honor you and what you said, Lisa. This is the moment, and we as allies, supporters, friends, have to lean in with you to the change that we all, for all our lives, have known must happen but today is called for it in earnest. So I thank you all for who you are, how you are, and what you do, and for the privilege of getting to support each of you. I have also the best boss in the universe, and so I'm going to turn it back over to Sean Brown, and thank you very much to all of you for being part of today.
Thank you so much, Roz, and thank you immensely to Hattie and Lisa and Catherine and Halima and Janice for your comments in the conversation today. A couple of people asked about membership, joining, and other information. We will, after the seminar is over, have up the link to both Heritage Giving Fund and the Village Giving Circle, both at the Texas Women's Foundation, and you can also find links to them on the Texas Women's Foundation site. As I listened today, activate and examine yourself were two of the takeaways. And this certainly was a special moment in time for us to come together and celebrate the tradition of Black philanthropy, of giving in the Black community. As Roz mentioned, we at the Texas Women's Foundation are so blessed to house not only Heritage Giving Fund and the Village Giving Circle, but other giving circles that meet specific needs within our community. And you might ask yourself, why the Texas Women's Foundation for those particular giving circles? And it is an easy answer when you look at the mission of the Texas Women's Foundation to be a driver of meaningful social and economic change for women, girls, and families. So no, not each of these giving circles is focused specifically on women and girls, but they are led by strong women, and they are increasing the number of women philanthropies who provide meaningful, and whatever meaningful means for you at whatever stage in your career or your walk as a philanthropist is, it's meaningful. And change, meaning it's different than how you started. And we each seek to make a difference in the space that we are in, because we are facing challenges on a daily basis as a nation and in our individual communities. Thank you to all of you who are part of this movement to create greater diversity in philanthropy. It's my pleasure on behalf of the Texas Women's Foundation to have hosted you all today, and hope that you have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.